All right, welcome to this explainer. We're stepping straight back into 1943 to break down what is, honestly, the most unbelievable high-stakes espionage thriller of the entire Second World War. We're talking about a moment where battles weren't just fought with bullets and bombs, but with pure, unadulterated deception. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, a mission that absolutely proves reality is far stranger and way more fascinating than fiction.
So picture the impossible dilemma the Allies were facing. By 1943, the war was at an absolute critical turning point. They just managed to drive the Axis forces out of North Africa. But that huge victory brought them face to face with a terrifying question. Where do we go next? They had to crack Fortress Europe, but any direct assault onto the continent was going to be an absolute bloodbath. They desperately needed a way in, and more importantly, they needed an edge.
Geographically speaking, Sicily was the obvious target, right? It sits right there, literally the perfect stepping stone between North Africa and mainland Italy. But here was the catch. The German commanders had maps too. They knew Sicily was the logical next move, so they fortified it heavily. If the Allies attacked directly, they were walking straight into a meat grinder. So they desperately needed the Germans to believe the real strike was aimed somewhere completely different, specifically at Greece and Sardinia. But how do you actually convince the enemy of a lie that massive? Well, enter Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley. These two British intelligence officers were tasked with figuring out a diversion, and what they pitched was, well, it was wildly unusual, and honestly, a little dark. It was an idea so out of the box that military command initially just dismissed it as completely impossible. Their grand solution to trick the entire Third Reich? A corpse. The absolute brilliance of this plan was its audacious simplicity. It literally boiled down to 3 steps. 1, get an unidentified body. 2, plant incredibly sensitive but completely fake invasion plans on it. And 3, just let the enemy find it. They were going to feed a massive lie directly to the German high command, and they were going to use a dead man to deliver the mail. But you can't just use anyone for something like this. They needed a blank slate. Tragically, they found that in a man named Glyndwr Michael. He was a homeless Welsh civilian who died after accidentally eating rat poison. And crucially for British intelligence, his death left no close relatives behind who would come around asking difficult questions. He was a forgotten man, about to be thrust right into the center of a global conflict. What happens next is totally surreal. They take this forgotten homeless civilian and completely transform him into a highly decorated, entirely fictional military officer. British authorities carefully dressed him in a crisp Royal Marines uniform and gave him a brand new, completely invented name, Major William Martin. The civilian ceased to exist, and this phantom officer was born, carrying the fate of the war. Now, how do you actually convince a deeply paranoid German intelligence officer that a dead man is a high-ranking career? Slapping a uniform on him and stuffing top-secret documents in his pocket isn't going to cut it for a second. To make this deception work, the fake officer needed a rich, detailed, completely believable human life. Spies call this pocket litter, the mundane, everyday junk we all carry that proves we are who we say we are. So they meticulously built an ordinary, slightly messy life for Major Martin. We're talking theater ticket stubs, everyday receipts, even a bank overdraft notice because, hey, what young officer doesn't have a little bit of debt? Actually, they went even further. They threw in a stern letter from his dad and a photo of a totally fake fiancée named Pam, complete with old love letters. Every single piece of fake correspondence was just a masterstroke of frantic genius. Tucked right in the middle of all those carefully crafted personal effects was the real payload, the bait. It was a locked briefcase, literally chained to Major Martin. Inside were the secret military documents explicitly stating the Allies were gearing up to invade Greece and Sardinia, and that any movement towards Sicily was just a big smokescreen. And every single word in that briefcase was absolutely false. By April 1943, it's go time. A British subsurfaces in the dead of night off the coast of neutral Spain. They carefully slip the body into the water, and just hours later, the current carries him to shore where local fishermen find him, exactly as calculated. The body gets handed over to Spanish authorities, the forged intelligence gets photographed by German spies, and eventually that vital misinformation lands right on the desk of Adolf Hitler himself. This whole setup in Spain was a masterclass in diplomatic theater. Spain was officially neutral, sure, but it was an open secret that Spanish officials were buddy-buddy with German intelligence. So the British spring their trap. They publicly and loudly demanded the briefcase back completely unopened. But secretly,
They were praying the Spanish officials would look the other way and let the Germans photograph the contents first. And that is exactly what went down. And guess what? The Germans thought they'd scored the intelligence coup of the century. Hitler bought it hook, line, and sinker. Believing the documents were genuine, the German high command furiously scrambled to reinforce Greece and Sardinia. Massive numbers of troops, heavy tanks, and aircraft were pulled right out of Sicily and redirected. The trap hadn't just worked, it worked flawlessly. Which brings us to July 10th, 1943, a massive turning point in global history. This was the date of the actual Allied invasion of Sicily. This was the moment of truth where Montagu and Cholmondeley would finally find out if their dead man had done his job. The Allied forces hit the beaches, bracing for an absolute bloodbath. But instead, the defenses were drastically weaker than they'd originally modeled. Now, yes, there was still fierce fighting, but because the massive German war machine had been busy deploying its resources to fight a phantom invasion in Greece and Sardinia, the Allies faced far less resistance.
You really can't overstate the impact of this. Historians looking back believe this single act of misdirection, this insanely complex web of lies carried on the shoulders of a dead man, saved thousands upon thousands of Allied lives. By cracking Sicily with lighter casualties, it kicked open the door to the whole Italian campaign and totally shifted the momentum of the war. For decades after the war, British intelligence kept Operation Mincemeat locked down tight. Major William Martin never actually existed, but he was still buried with full military honors in Spain under his fake name. It wasn't until years later that historians finally identified Glyndor Michael. Today, if you visit the gravestone, it beautifully acknowledges both identities, a hero with two names. It really drives home something profound. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in war isn't a gun. It's a story that your enemy believes. The Germans didn't divert their armies just because of a clever forgery. They moved them because they believed that forgery belonged to a real human being. A tiny illusion, a worn wallet, a fake photo of a girl named Pam, a theater ticket, literally altered the course of history. So I want to leave you with a thought. We just saw how the fate of the free world once literally hinged on a meticulously crafted story we sold to our enemies. It kind of makes you wonder, in our modern age of endless information, if a fabricated story can defeat an entire war machine, what fictions are currently reshaping our world and our decisions without us even knowing? Keep questioning what you see, and until next time, keep exploring the stories behind the history.